Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
So Jubes & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is two new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Good morning and welcome to Sunday with Michael Portillo, with 2 hours of good conversation, arts and entertainment, ethical dilemmas and a sense of the ridiculous too. Coming up, we examine last night's Eurovision Song Contest extravaganza in Liverpool. Was there too much politics in choosing the winner, or was there not enough politics, with Ukraine's President Zelensky being blocked from making a speech? The race to become London mayor has begun. Almost day by day, more candidates seek to be the Conservative Party nominee. I'll be talking to Susan Hall, the former leader of the Conservatives in City Hall, about why she wants the job. As ever, we'll delve into the cultural riches offered in this country as we discuss Sam Mendes' new play about how Richard Burton and John Gielgud hit it off during a 1960s production of Hamlet. We'll also be looking ahead to the BAFTA Awards, which take place this evening. All that and much more after the news with Rory Stewart.
Thank you very much, Michael. The latest from the GB newsroom. Nurses are calling for a double-digit pay offer to prevent further strike action. The head of the Royal College of Nursing, Pat Cullen, told the Sunday Times the government risks another 6 months of industrial action if negotiations aren't reopened. Members rejected a 5% offer, which was accepted by 14 other unions. Well, a new ballot for strikes will be held later this month. Liverpool's been seen as the big winner after hosting the Eurovision Song Contest, with the Prime Minister saying the city has done the UK and Ukraine proud. Swedish pop star Loreen made history, becoming the only woman to win the event twice. The country now ties with Ireland for the most song contest victories, both claiming 7 titles. The UK's entry, Mae Muller, finished second last behind Germany. While she may have been disappointed, but her fans certainly weren't.
She did a brilliant job and she's represented the UK so well.
She was amazing. She did the UK proud, definitely.
Not number 1, but I think we did well. Amazing. Top 5 performance, easily. She's our winner!
Well, as the song contest was underway, Russian missiles were fired at the hometown of the Ukrainian entry. Ternopil was struck as pop group Tvorchi performed, the state emergency service posting a video of a warehouse that was hit. Meanwhile, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has secured more military aid from Germany. In Berlin, he thanked Chancellor Olaf Scholz and his government for their solidarity in the fight against Russian aggression. Labour says it has plans to create 80,000 new jobs in the car industry. The party says it will part-finance 8 factories to achieve their goal. It'll also help power nearly 2 million electric vehicles. Well, under the proposed plan, the West Midlands will benefit from 28,000 jobs and the North West from 11,000. A truce between Israel and the militant Islamic Jihad group is in place. Fighting continued for a couple of hours after the agreement, with Israel's military saying it hit targets in response to rocket fire. It is hoped the truce will end the worst episode of cross-border fire since a 10-day war in 2021. Turkey is bracing itself for possible protests or clashes as voting continues for the presidential election. People across the country, including President Erdogan, are heading to polling stations in the first round of the elections. The president faces the biggest political challenge of his career, hoping for re-election after 20 years in power. Opinion polls, they show it will be tight, though, with a clear indication of the result expected this evening. More than 1,500 UK troops will train alongside personnel from 11 NATO nations in a major exercise in Estonia. Well, in total, around 14,000 military personnel are set to take part in the exercise called Spring Storm. That will last for 2 weeks. It'll see troops tested on battlefield scenarios, giving them a chance to train on the land that one day they might need to defend. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now, though, back to Michael.
Thank you, Rory Smith. Well, Rishi Sunak had a difficult day yesterday when his football team, Southampton, were relegated in his presence at St Mary's Stadium. But of longer-term consequence is the meeting of the Conservative Democratic Organisation, which heard a robust attack on his leadership from former Home Secretary Priti Patel. Meanwhile, the Sunday Telegraph reports that the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, wants European Union citizens living in the UK with settled status and paying tax to have the vote in this country. GB News' senior political commentator, Nigel Nelson, is with me. What do you make of the ongoing attacks on Rishi Sunak? I was discussing this earlier with Camilla. I was making the point that these people are frustrated that the Conservatives don't seem to have a proposition that distinguishes them from Labour in terms of public spending and taxation. They don't seem to have a policy that blends with their brand. Camilla was making the argument that this is very destabilising for the Conservative Party to be in such obvious rows leading up to the election.
I'd go further and say it's civil war. And they've been fighting the civil war for the last 4 years. So if you wanted to actually help the Conservative Party, you don't do things like this. I mean, the only thing that Priti Patel, I think, got right yesterday was that she apologised for the losses in the local council elections. She made the point that this was Westminster's fault. That's what people were reacting against. That went down with an awful lot of the local councillors who did lose, including my wife, who lost her seat. So I think that that was a plus. What didn't come out of it is what you're going to do about it. So if the subtext of everything she's saying is bring back Boris, that almost certainly is not going to happen now.
No. I mean, she did talk about having got rid of a surefire election winning Prime Minister or something like that, which is not quite the same as advocating bringing him back. But these people do want to hear something about how the Conservative Party is going to address the subject of growth. And don't you think that the Conservatives are in a slightly dangerous position if Labour's proposition is high taxes and high public spending. The Conservative proposition is identical. What would be the reason for voting Conservative in those circumstances?
Well, I think that the Labour plan at the moment is not high taxes. I mean, there are certain taxes that they will impose. The non-dom tax status would go, the charitable status of private schools, those particular kind of tax changes. I'm sure there would be a greater windfall tax on the energy companies. But they're not talking about actually raising basic rate or anything like that.
No.
What Keir Starmer is talking about is having the fastest growth in the G7. He's yet to explain how he's going to achieve that. And so what he did yesterday, which was a kind of relaunch of the Labour Party, was to say that his administration is going to be, as he put it, clause 4 on steroids. And quite clearly, his ambitions are much greater than Tony Blair's were in 1997. Whether or not you actually achieve that is another matter.
I find it extraordinary how politicians really believe that by mouthing a slogan, they sort of achieve the policy. I mean, I'd love to have the greatest growth in the G7. I think it's an absolutely splendid idea. But I see no evidence whatsoever that Labour, or indeed Conservatives, are going to achieve it. And when I was referring to high taxes, I wasn't particularly referring to ideas that Labour might have for putting taxes higher. I'm saying that we are at an historically very high level of tax burden and historically a very high level of public spending.
Yes, and that's absolutely true. So we have the highest tax burden for 70 years. Clearly that the likes of Priti Patel and the others who gathered at the conference yesterday want to see a pledge of lower taxes. But we've tried that. We tried that with Liz Truss, and it didn't work. And I don't think you can do that at a time of high inflation. Once inflation is beaten, certainly you can start addressing the tax issue. What you can't do is address it yet.
The Conservative leadership certainly takes your point of view at the moment. Let's talk about Keir Starmer's idea of giving the vote to European Union citizens who have settled status and pay tax. I'm broadly sympathetic to this. Does it raise an issue for Labour? Does it sound as though they're going soft on Brexit?
Yeah, well, it does. I mean, that could be the reason why that promise was in Keir Starmer's 10 pledges when he was fighting to become leader. It's one he hasn't turned his back on. It wasn't in the 86-page draft manifesto that came out last week. Votes for 16s were, but that particular one wasn't. When it comes to the actual issue, that EU citizens already do have the right to vote. They can vote in local elections here. And the one thing I think you've actually got to think about is our electoral system is now all over the place and really needs tidying up. So in Scotland, for instance, it's not just EU citizens that can vote, it's anybody, any foreign resident has got the vote there. Same in Wales. 16s can vote there. Same in Wales. In Scotland, prisoners serving under 12 months can vote. So what we need to do is look at the electoral system and say, hang on, we need some kind of common way of doing this rather than have this hodgepodge all over the country.
Is it clear to you that 16 and 17-year-olds are more likely to vote Labour? And what would you say about EU citizens with settled status? More likely to vote Labour?
I think probably yes, is the answer to that. I don't know about 16-year-olds, but I suspect they'll be more likely to be Labour voters. Obviously, that's at the back of Keir Starmer's mind if he's going to change it. On votes at 16, I was persuaded that this was actually a good idea by listening to the Youth Parliament. And it was a young woman who said, look, this is a ridiculous situation. I can marry my MP, I can have children with my MP, but I can't vote for my MP. So I took her point that a 16-year-old can be a company director. Where it becomes a bit of a problem is looking forward to the future. At what point are you an adult? So you might get the vote at 16, but you still can't buy alcohol at 16. And how would we feel, for instance, if 16-year-olds were adults, if they went into an adult prison?
You remind me of that protest song during the Vietnam years, you're old enough to kill, but not for voting. So it all comes round again. Nigel, thank you very much. After the recent local election results, which may suggest that Labour could be the largest party following the general election, but not necessarily with an overall majority, the party leader, Sir Keir Starmer, would not rule out a coalition with the Liberal Democrats. The Lib Dems want proportional representation, since their proportion of votes received is higher than their proportion of seats in Parliament. When they were in coalition with the Conservatives a decade ago, they extracted a referendum on the subject, but the proposed reform was heavily defeated. Given that more votes go to the parties on the left of the spectrum than on the right, electoral reform could make it virtually impossible for the Conservatives ever to form a majority government. But Labour has not embraced change, maybe because under a proportionate system, it would probably always have to share power too. GB News' Deputy Political Editor Tom Harwood joins me now from Hemel Hempstead to discuss this. Good morning, Tom.
Good morning.
Do you have any idea, to begin with, why the proposition of switching to alternative vote back in 2011 was defeated by, let me just remember, by 68% to 32%? You'd think there might be quite a lot of sympathy for proportional representation, but there certainly wasn't 12 years ago.
It was a seismic referendum result that really actually was the precise opposite of what the polls were indicating at the start of that referendum campaign. If we remember back to 2011, at the start of the referendum campaign, those campaigning in favour of the alternative vote had about a 2-to-1 majority in favour of them in the opinion polls. By the time that the country actually voted, however, that had flipped a 2-to-1 majority against. Now, there are a number of reasons why that might be the case. There was a hugely effective referendum campaign, actually led by some of the same people who led the Vote Leave campaign a few years later, with that simple message of maintaining one person, one vote, and emphasising the complexity of this other system. I think something else that probably found against AV is this wasn't what the Liberal Democrats actually wanted. They compromised on this as the proposal to go out in that referendum. The Lib Dems always wanted proportional representation, and AV isn't a proportional system. It's a more proportional system than first past the post. It ensures that every constituency has at least 50% plus one of the vote to get that member over the line. Nick Clegg described it himself as a grubby little compromise, a phrase that was repeated again and again throughout the course of that referendum campaign. So a huge number of factors went into that, but fundamentally there was a big endorsement for the voting system that we have currently. And I think one of the issues with this as a political point of discussion is that to the average person on the street, to the voter that is thinking about what they're going to vote on at the next election, electoral reform is nowhere close to the top sense of priorities. People are concerned about the cost of living. People are concerned about inflation, about economic growth, about their lot in life. And something that politicians like to discuss amongst themselves in terms of precisely how we decide how the House of Commons is composed might not seem the most in-touch issue to be talking about.
But it's worse than that, Tom. It's not just they're talking about something which most people aren't terribly interested in. It's that they're talking about political advantage. I mean, the reason that Labour wants votes for 16 and 17-year-olds is they think there's political advantage. The reason why the Lib Dems want electoral reform is they think there's political advantage. But may I ask you this? Why on earth has this subject come up? Why doesn't Labour just say, look, we're going to win with an overall majority. You know, we're now doing terribly well in Scotland. We're confident we're going to be a government with a majority. Why on earth are people asking about coalitions and electoral reform? It's not on the agenda. Why don't they just say that?
Well, I think that that's what Keir Starmer wants to say. The problem is his party doesn't always agree with him. At the last two Labour Party conferences, there has been a big grassroots movement within the Labour Party to push for proportional representation. There have been motions on the floor of the Labour Party conference that are supposedly binding of the party to commit the party to PR. So one of the issues that Keir Starmer has, even though clearly he would like to win with a majority, and any party that wins with a majority doesn't necessarily then want to undermine that with electoral reform. One of the issues for the Labour leader is that a lot of the people within his party, within his grassroots, within those who vote on motions at the Labour Party conference, his foot soldiers, if you will, a sizable proportion of them, by some counts a majority, want proportional representation. So Keir Starmer has a divided party on this issue. I think one of the other issues here is that there is this myth that proportional representation would always deliver some sort of quote-unquote progressive alliance, some sort of alliance of the left-leaning parties. When we're looking at that, we forget that in 2015 it was actually the right-leaning parties that had a majority of the vote. That's when UKIP was riding at its highest, for example. And if you were to add up the votes of the Northern Irish Unionists, the Conservatives and UKIP in 2015, you actually get a majority of the vote. So I think it might be a misnomer to suggest that proportional representation would always lock out the right from power, because of course elections would be run in a different way under that system. I think one of the more pertinent arguments against this system is that you don't know what you're getting. The manifesto, if you want, the prospectus for government, the coalition agreement, is a grubby backroom deal done between politicians after the election, rather than sorting out the manifesto before the election. So I think one of the crucial differences here between first past the post and majority government and proportional representation and coalition government is with first past the post, voters know that manifesto before the election. With proportional representation, you don't get to see the coalition agreement until after the election.
Well, Tom, you've certainly got your arguments well rehearsed should there ever be a referendum. When I was a Conservative Member of Parliament, I was quaking at the idea that they might introduce proportional representation, because I rather took it for granted that that would mean there never would be a majority Conservative government. You've made the counterpoint. I also think it's quite remarkable that we've got all the way through the 20th century and we're now some way into the 21st century without PR ever being introduced. And funnily enough, I have a feeling that it is as distant as ever, because, of course, actually what Labour wants is to win without a coalition and without having to do deals on the electoral system. Thank you, Tom, for joining us from Hemel Hempstead. Thanks to Nigel Nelson earlier for joining me. You're watching Sunday with Michael Portillo on GB News, Britain's news channel. Coming up, with now only a year to go until the London mayoral elections, candidates are beginning to announce their intention to challenge Sadiq Khan, with many intending to reverse his controversial ultra-low emission zone, which penalises older cars. I'll be joined by a Tory candidate hopeful. Also, as the UK hosted Eurovision last night, we'll be reflecting on the outcome and whether this country has any future hope of winning. That's after the break.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is two new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
No sooner has one set of elections concluded than we are anticipating next year's contest for London Mayor. Labour incumbent Sadiq Khan announced earlier this year that he would be standing again. The Greens and the Reform Party have selected their candidates, and an increasing number is vying to be the Conservative candidate. Susan Hall was the Conservative leader at City Hall and has now announced her wish to be mayor. Tackling crime in London and stopping the expansion of the ultra-low emission zone are central components of her campaign. I'm joined by Susan Hall now.
Good morning.
Welcome, good morning. One of the things that's really changed in my lifetime is the collapse of confidence in the police.
Yes.
Not least the Metropolitan Police. What is your solution?
I think more resource needs to be put into the police. I think various different things in London. We have got to support the police. If we just look at London, and that's the place that I'm interested in standing, if we just look at London, the Police and Crime Commissioner is Sadiq Khan, and he just doesn't take it seriously. He'll knock the police, he'll do anything for the right PR, but he needs to get behind the police and he needs to sort some of the issues out.
When you say he doesn't take it seriously, he did remove the Commissioner. He removed Cressida Dick. That's quite an important move.
In an appalling way, and if you read the Windsor report, you'll see the way he dealt with that was an absolute disgrace, which actually doesn't then give the police confidence in him to back them in a certain way.
So how would we know, if you were mayor, that you were taking it seriously, to quote you? What would that look like?
I'd be talking to Samart Rowley straight away. I think one of the things that keeps getting missed out is low-level crime. I call it low-level crime. If it happens to you, it's terrible. There's a mobile phone, for instance, stolen every 6 minutes in the city. This leads to people just not feeling confidence in the police.
Susan, lots of us know the things that upset us about crime and the police, but we're looking to you for solutions.
Yep.
What are the solutions to things like this? You've said so far you're going to talk to Samart Rowley, but I'm sure the present mayor does that as well. What's different about what you would do?
OK, I'd set up a unit in each of the BCUs, and they're the command units around London, to specifically look at the lower-level crime and to deal with it properly. Lots of this is organised crime. So many people report that they tell the police that their phone's been stolen, or their cars, that they've got trackers on, and nothing is done about it. It's the inaction that people are so concerned about. So we need to actually deal with that.
A lot of us are concerned, and many women are concerned, about the rottenness of the Met. Samart Rowley is an insider. He's been there a long time. It sounds, since you say you're going to talk to him, as though you have confidence in him. Do you have confidence in Samart Rowley?
Yes, I do have confidence.
Why? What's it based on?
Because he realises the problems, he's accepting the problems, whereas perhaps commissioners in the past haven't really come to terms with the fact that there are real issues. He's talking to the Home Secretary at the moment about getting the ability to sack officers that he knows just should not be in the force. At the moment, it's hard to believe that the Commissioner cannot sack rogue officers. They have to go in front of a board.
But wouldn't Sadiq Khan say the same? Wouldn't he say that Mark Rowley ought to have the power to sack officers? Is there a difference between you there?
But that needs to be pushed forward, because we have got to get trust and confidence back in the police. And the mayor has absolutely got to get behind the police to look at various ways from the mayor's position, with funding, etc., that we can put more resource back into the police, into the areas that we need to make things better.
Yes. Resource, I believe, is a euphemism for money Where are you going to get this money from?
Well, if you look at the Mayor's budget, every single year between the draft budget and the final budget, hundreds of millions of pounds suddenly appear. I would suggest that he stop doing ridiculous things like looking to pull down statues, to rename roads, all of these things on the periphery that you need not...
But Susan, renaming a road doesn't cost the sort of money that we need for the police.
But you know, Michael, all these little things add up. He needs to concentrate on 3 core things. Policing, he needs to sort out the housing crisis, and he needs to get the transport system working properly.
Actually, to remind you, we're talking about what you're going to do, not so much what he should do, what you are going to do.
Yes, and actually, you cannot be a mayor focused on one thing. It's such a big city. My main thrust is on policing. But, of course, we cannot ignore the fact that we've got a housing crisis. We cannot ignore the fact that the Mayor promised 0 strikes, and we all know the situation we're in London.
Right.
He's also...
let me get you towards your policies. You've mentioned more resource for the police, but you're against ULEZ, as it's called, ultra-low emission zone.
If I can correct you, I'm just against the expansion.
The extension. But isn't one of the effects of that to raise quite a lot of money? So
yes,
while you're trying to put more money into the police, you're denying yourself money from ULEZ.
No. Well, then you're just admitting it's nothing but a tax. And the people that are going to end up paying that tax, and that's all it is, are the poorest in our society. That cannot be right. And for people that are nearer inside London that say, oh, it doesn't make any difference, it doesn't make any difference to me. Oh, yes, it will, because people with non-compliant vans that live outside London will not be paying an extra £12.50 to come in and do plumbing or building or whatever else when they can get the work outside London and not incur that tax.
I think ULEZ has been a gift to you, a gift to the Conservatives, because there's something you can be against. So, all right, let's take that as a gift.
But
I
Michael,
imagine all Conservatives will be against it.
But, Michael, it's not a gift for the poorest in our community who cannot afford this. And this is going to affect all of us. Nurses will not be able to come in for shifts. It's far more serious than people are thinking.
What's the big idea? Vote Susan Hall because?
Because you'll get somebody that will roll their sleeves up on day one and get on with this job. It's the best job, in my view, in the country politically, because you will have 4 years where you cannot be removed, so you know you've got 4 years to make a plan work, to make the city better, to look at the housing crisis, certainly to get the policing situation sorted out. And you can really get down to it. So I would work morning, noon and night. I'm a Londoner through and through, and I'm sick to death of the mess that this beautiful city of ours is in. And I think it's time somebody grabbed it by the neck and dealt with it. That's what you'd get from me. A lot of hard work and an absolute ambition to have a safer, cleaner, happier city.
What I'm getting from you is a lot of metaphors, rolling up the sleeves and grabbing things by the neck. And I'm getting a lot of comparatives, better, bigger, whatever. I'm lacking specifics. What are the specifics?
Well, you'll have to wait till you see my manifesto.
But you could help us now. But by the time you get to your manifesto, you've got to be a big name. You've got to have...
Absolutely
you've
right.
You've got to be recognised. You've got to be on the tip of people's tongues.
And I'm very grateful that you're giving me the opportunity to tell you some of the things...
And I'm so grateful you're here. But just before we finish, and we're finishing in a second, they're going to switch off in a moment and they'll say, God, I remember Susan Hall because she said...
I'm a ballsy woman that wants to get things done.
That might do it. All right. Thank you very much. Susan Hall. Last night, the United Kingdom hosted the Eurovision Song Contest in Liverpool on behalf of Ukraine, last year's winner. GB News Northwest reporter Sophie Reaper was there at the heart of the event.
What a night. After all the build-up, after all the preparations, the grand final of Eurovision in Liverpool is now over. And the name on everybody's lips is, of course, our winner, Loreen from Sweden. It was a bit tense between her and the act from Finland, but ultimately, in the end, it came down to the huge number of jury votes which clinched the win for the Swedish songstress. Now, this isn't the first time she's taken home the Eurovision crown. She also won it back in 2012. Now, what that means is not only will Sweden get the chance to host the contest next year, but it also means they'll be able to host it on the 50th anniversary of ABBA winning the competition back in 1974. Now, it wasn't as great of a night for the UK, unfortunately. Our act, May Muller, came second to last, coming just above Germany. Now, that may have not been the best result for the UK, but as a whole, Liverpool and the United Kingdom put on a performance here at Eurovision that will be remembered for many, many years to come.
Thank you, Sophie, for that roundup. For the second weekend in a row, the UK was in the international spotlight, putting on a lavish display of pageantry, exuberant costumes and musical fanfare. Partly due to decades of underperformance by UK entrants, and partly thanks to devastatingly witty and anarchic commentary by Terry Wogan and then by Graham Norton, Eurovision has been treated in Britain largely as a joke. But last year things were different, as Ukraine's song won in an apparent demonstration of solidarity with a country that had been invaded by Russia. And what's more, Britain came second last year. Liverpool, host city, was festooned with Ukrainian flags, presumably another expression of solidarity. British people have long complained that their entry is subject to political voting, either because blocks of nations vote for each other or because we're being punished for something like Brexit. So it was mildly amusing to learn that President Zelensky was blocked from making a speech at the event by the European Broadcasting Union, as its rules apparently banned politics. Britain returned to its usual form last night, with May Muller from Kentish Town beating only the German entrants, while Loreen became the first woman to win the contest twice, singing for Sweden. Dr. Paul Jordan, also known as Dr. Eurovision, is a leading expert on the Eurovision Song Contest, and he joins me now live from Liverpool, having attended last night's events. Welcome to GB News.
Hi, good morning, Michael. And yes, it's been fantastic in Liverpool. It's been a brilliant Eurovision. And I've got to say, I'm both tired and emotional this morning. It was a very late night.
Well, indeed. So I wanted to pick up on that point that Sophie made in her report, that even if the British song didn't do very well, Liverpool acquitted itself well. Do you want to give me some detail on why that is? Is this just something we're saying, oh, Liverpool did it very well? Or was there something special about the way Liverpool rose to the challenge of substituting for Ukraine?
Well, this was a very unique year. This is the first time really we're hosting on behalf of another country because of a war. It's the first time since 1980 that the previous year's winner has not hosted the event. And yeah, they've managed to combine both musicality, entertainment, but also a bit of heart. And Liverpool and the BBC have done a brilliant job of making sure that we showed the best of the UK, the best of Ukraine and the best of Liverpool. It's a really hard task to pull off. This was Ukraine's contest that we were hosting on their behalf, and yeah, they've done a brilliant job. And I really do think that Liverpool have pulled out all the stops. They've got a lot of culture going on. There's a lot of different events, lots of nods to Ukraine, but also showcasing Liverpool's rich cultural and musical heritage too. It's a really difficult balance to do, to find, but they've done that, and they've done it really, really well. They should be really proud.
It may be the biggest surprise since Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II parachuted into the London Olympics, accompanied by James Bond. Last night, the Princess of Wales played the piano, looking, I must say, absolutely stunning, in a beautifully chosen dress in blue, one of the two colours of Ukraine. What was the impact of that?
I think these things really showcase the UK at its best. Whether you're a monarchist or not, they're really famous around the world. And, she did a brilliant job. Also, so did King Charles and Queen Camilla during this first semi-final. When they were in the arena a couple of weeks ago, they recorded a segment and they had basically a part to play in the opening ceremony of that first semi-final. I think it's brilliant. And I think people really took the Queen to their hearts in the Olympic Games. That showcased the best of the UK, the best of Britain in 2012. And similarly, even with the Jubilee last year, when the Queen did that little sketch with Paddington, it was absolutely adorable. I think Kate was brilliant. And I think it overall showed, Britain at its best. And I say that as someone who's not really a big fan of the royal family, but I think, what they do well.
I'm not someone who watches Eurovision very closely year by year, to put it mildly. But, I mean, do other countries produce the wife of the heir to the throne playing the piano? Is this kind of fairly standard practice, or is this quite unusual?
Well, that's, I think, fairly unusual, but there have been times when you've had presidents and you've had the Queen of Norway in the audience and things like that. So it's not without precedent, but yeah, certainly I think we've done it probably better than everyone else.
How do you feel about the fact that President Zelensky wasn't allowed to make an address, something which had been supported by Rishi Sunak? Now, you might, first of all, just say, well, look, politics don't come into this. But, of course, that isn't the case. I mean, the competition was being held in Liverpool because it couldn't be held in Ukraine. It wasn't being held in Ukraine because Ukraine has been invaded. I think I'm right in saying that Russia and Belarus are not allowed to participate. So, of course, there's politics. And what was being suggested was that President Zelensky would have an opportunity to talk about why the competition was not being held in his country, where it should have been, because his country's singers won last year. What do you think of that?
I think it's probably not really appropriate. There was a lot of Ukraine reflected in Eurovision this year. I don't think there was a real need for Zelensky to do a speech or to make any kind of statement. And I think that's a little bit of kind of political savvy from Rishi Sunak, to be honest. I think he was using that as an opportunity. This is not without precedent, though. In 2005, Ukraine hosted the event for the first time after the so-called Orange Revolution, and the then president, Viktor Yushchenko, tried to do a speech. He wanted to do, apparently, a 40-minute speech. Now, Eurovision is long enough. The organisers said no. He was allowed to give the trophy to the eventual winner, Greece, but he wasn't allowed to do that speech. And, you know, at the end of the day, it's a television show. Yes, politics comes into it sometimes, but so too does it with the World Cup in Qatar and the Olympic Games. International events sometimes have politics involved. Overall, the music speaks. It's a singing contest. It's a fun contest. It's a musical jamboree, shall we say. It's joyous. I don't think we need a political rally in the middle of the contest. Now,
Paul, was we robbed? We came second from bottom, returning to our kind of rather usual position. What was it, a bad song, or were countries ganging up against us, or were they ganging up to vote for each other? What was going on? Why did we come second bottom?
I think the challenge with Eurovision is it's a very long contest. There's a lot of songs. There were 26 songs last night. And to get votes, you have to be in the top 10 of a country. You get points from 1 to 8, 10, then 12. So technically, you could come 11th with everyone scoring and come last. I think as a song, it's a perfectly good song. But during the week, I saw her rehearsals, and I've got to say, the staging looked amazing, but her vocals weren't. And I was concerned that the UK wasn't going to do well. But this happens. You know, we came second last year, second last this year. This happened to France in 2021. They came second, and then they were near the bottom in 2022. You know, these things happen. I don't think we should be worrying too much about people not liking us. I just think people are expecting probably something better from the UK. But I think overall, it was a brilliant showcase for the BBC, for Liverpool, for the UK, and we did it on behalf of Ukraine. Good pop song. Let's continue to do, you know, on the same track. Let's try and just keep going. It takes countries a long time to turn things around. Germany, the Netherlands, Sweden, it took them a long time to win, and then eventually they got it right. So let's just see how we do. I don't think we should keep going between public vote and then internal selection. I think we need a clear long-term strategy. Let's see. It's only the second year we've been trying seriously, if I'm honest. So let's see what next year brings. Can't expect to win every year.
No, we've hardly won it every year. That's an understatement. But perhaps we do need to take it more seriously. As I said in my introductory remarks, I think actually Britain has tended to regard this as a bit of a joke. And I dare say, like most competition, if you're going to win, you have to take it very, very seriously. Dr. Paul Jordan, thank you very much for joining us today. You're watching Sunday with Michael Portillo on GB News, Britain's news channel. Coming up, what happened when two titanic British actors came together to stage Hamlet on Broadway? And what influence does the work of Shakespeare exert 400 years on? Must the Bard be adapted for present-day audiences? That's after the break.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Britain is watching.
Welcome back to Sunday with Michael Portillo. With 137 performances, the longest-running Hamlet in Broadway history was staged in 1964. The Welsh actor Richard Burton, newly married to Elizabeth Taylor, was playing the lead in a production directed by John Gielgud. The story is told in a recently opened play at the National's Littleton Theatre, The Motive and the Cue. It's directed by Sam Mendes, and it reveals the explosive behind-the-scenes events. Burton and Gielgud collide fiercely in rehearsals, and there must be doubt about how the show can go on. Arts editor of The Express Online, Stefan Kyriazis, has been to see it. Hello.
Hey, how are you?
Did you have a marvellous evening?
I did. It's an absolutely gorgeous, delicious souffle of loviness. It's about theatre, darling. It's about acting. It's about Shakespeare. It's about the words. There's an absolute joy and delight in the words. Not only there are huge numbers of actual pieces from Shakespeare's text, there's also a lot of... It's based on two of the other actors that were in the rehearsal process on their memoirs. So it's based on what actually happened. And the huge joy is the interplay between Gielgud and Burton. You know, it's a titanic clash of personalities, of generations, of acting styles, and some phenomenal performances. Johnny Flynn is wonderful as Burton. He captures that kind of bombast and the delivery of the words and how he always goes up in volume. And Gielgud, by contrast, is that kind of mellifluous richness. It's all about the subtlety, darling. And the clash between them, there are gorgeous insults. The kind of Gielgud says to him, "Oh, you shout marvellously, darling," these sorts of things, and refers to his bugle of a voice. It's kind of compliments, but insults. But also there's so much underneath it. It's Gielgud's fear of no longer being relevant.
I'm very pleased to hear all this because I'm going to see the show tomorrow night, so that's extremely good news. I was just thinking about the history of this. I mean, people may not realise what Burton was in 1964. I mean, he was absolutely the megastar, not least because he had married Elizabeth Taylor. And I believe, by the way, that their volcanic relationship also comes into the story and the production. So you were taking a bunch of actors who were there to play Hamlet, and you were putting with them this global superstar who is going back every evening from the show, presumably to get drunk with Elizabeth Taylor. I mean, this is not a formula for success. 137 performances. I mean, no one would dream of putting on 137 performances for Hamlet today, would they?
No, and on Broadway.
Yeah.
So it was absolutely electrifying star power, and also Gielgud's was still a big name, but clearly people were coming for Burton, and Burton was very aware of that, and there was an arrogance to it, but also a terror. You know, it's not his genre. So there's this push and pull of respect and resentment between Gielgud and Burton. Gielgud, still, you know, the greatest of his time, wishes he was out there. And so it's this push and pull. And behind the scenes, you have Taylor and Burton having parties, Burton turning up drunk to rehearsals.
Yes.
Gielgud
and she tormenting him. She was always tormenting him. I want to say a word about text, because I studied Hamlet at A-level and can still recall chunks of it. And to me, it was one of the great experiences of my life, getting inside the text and knowing it fundamentally. You had a similar experience with Lear at the same age. Yep. I mean, just say something about the virtue of getting to know a text.
Well, there's the joy that you come to recognise, more than anything, apart from anything, Shakespeare is about human nature. He's got this piercing ability to get to everything that's wonderful and ugly about how we behave, and we recognise ourselves up there, but it's couched in the most glorious language as well. You sit there thinking, oh, I wish I could express myself like that. It's just the precision of it, the turn of phrase, the beauty of the language, and this play is packed with that. You have lots of monologues.
There's a word I'd use, which is that it's porous, by which I mean that you go back to it again and again, and it's like discovering it for the first time, because there are so many layers of meaning. The Motive in the Queue at the Littleton Theatre, which is part of the National Theatre. Now, the word ableism has come into the theatre, and why is that? This is also a Shakespeare story.
Yes, well, this is currently at the Globe, about to do Much Ado About Nothing, and you've got... you have one... Midsummer Night's Dream, I apologise. Yes. You have one of the actresses playing Hermia, and Hermia in this is a small person and constantly throughout the play referred to as little. She's belittled for her size.
Yes.
And you now have an actress playing the role.
I remember she has a line, it's something like, always harping on my size. Yes. I think the actress is called Francesca Hill, if I recall, and she's playing the part. So here, a small person is being played by a small person.
Yes.
Should that surprise us?
I think it's incredibly interesting, and I think there's a lot of debate over whether there should be trigger warnings or not. People are apparently shocked now to see it on stage. The director is saying they're already seeing the audiences almost gasp at some of the insults that are thrown because you've never thought about it quite like that before.
Yes.
And the actress herself, who basically ultimately is the only person we should listen to, is saying that for her it's incredibly important to make people aware of this. You know, that we've used sort of people's flaws in whatever form as a punch bag so often through history, from Shakespeare onwards, and just, you know, in the playground amongst ourselves. We'll pick on something that's different and use it to belittle someone. And the actress herself has spoken out about the power of this and how important it is to her. So I think it's incredibly important that she's playing the role. I think it's incredibly interesting. Do I think we need a trigger warning? Is a whole other conversation. I personally don't think we do. I think we can go along and be suddenly shocked, but then our minds are opened, and that's enough.
And presumably the even greater breakthrough is when an actor who is small plays any old part and we don't even think about it. That's kind of the real breakthrough, isn't it? Now, in other arts news, the BAFTAs are tonight from 7 o'clock, hosted by comedians Rob Beckett and Ramesh Ranganathan. to celebrate the best of the past year's television. 128 programmes are recognised in the nominations. Leading the pack with 6 nominations each are the Martin Freeman police drama The Responder and the Ben Whishaw medical comedy drama This Is Going to Hurt, an adaptation of Adam Kay's best-selling book. Do you want to make any predictions?
Well, This Is Going to Hurt and Ben Whishaw, he's glorious, but the best actor category is jam-packed. So you have Martin Freeman in there, you have Taron Egerton in there, you have a huge number of major actors in there. Possibly Whishaw, I think, for this one, but I would like to see Cillian Murphy recognised for Peaky Blinders. Final series, Titanic television show, changed the landscape. It also has inspired, as we know, dance productions. It's an incredible performance. So I would like to see him awarded. I'm not sure that he will be, but that would be my personal pick for it.
What is your view of the health of British television?
It's strong. I mean, what we're seeing now coming in is quite a few shows, again, that are from Apple TV, from Netflix, from all these sorts of things. So you have the argument not everybody can actually watch these.
And so how do you qualify for a BAFTA? Because the B is for British. How do you qualify? What part of the content has to be British? Maybe none of it.
I think generally the production team, you know, the funding and the production team and where it has been filmed and based, or who is involved. I don't know the exact rules on that one.
OK, didn't mean to catch you out.
No. I was just like, because I know with best foreign film and things like that with the Oscars. But I think there's a lot of very, very interesting picks in there, and also, you know. Are we obsessed with crime? Most of the dramas and the male actors are all playing detectives. It's all, you know, an ongoing British obsession.
We can't get away from crime. No. That's surely time to recognise programmes about travel by rail, but that will come.
It's a crime, Michael.
Thank you very much, Stephen Kyriazis. You're watching Sunday with Michael Portillo on GB News, Britain's news channel. In the next hour, as the former fiancé of Freddie Mercury has decided to put many treasures up for auction later this year, we'll be joined by auctioneer Charles Hanson. And as repairs are made to a work on the facade of the BBC's broadcasting house by controversial sculptor Eric Gill, I'll be asking whether we can overlook the vices of the artist in appreciating art. That's all coming up after the weather.
Hello there, I'm Stephen Keats with your latest Met Office forecast. And for Sunday then, we've got some rain edging its way southeastwards across the UK. Ahead of it, yes, we're starting off quite grey, but we're brightening up. And behind the front, should see some sunshine and a few showers. So here's that front then, slowly wriggling its way from northwest to southeast through Sunday. It's going to be a slow old process, so not making its way across to eastern England until well into this evening and overnight. So a three-way split then through Sunday for the far northwest of Scotland and Northern Ireland. Brightening skies, a few showers coming in here, but for eastern Scotland, parts of southern Scotland down towards northwest England, West Wales, quite a lot of cloud in the sky, some outbreaks of rain, the odd heavier burst, nothing particularly heavy, and a slowly improving picture across the rest of England and Wales. And where we've got the sunshine coming out, 19, 20 degrees quite possible, still a bit cooler on some eastern coast and cooler post-front as well. So through the evening then, this front will continue to work its way slowly southeastwards, perhaps the odd heavier burst of rain developing across East Anglia for a time overnight, but on the whole not amounting to too much, and then skies clearing to the northwest of this front, and it'll be a chilly old night actually across many northern and western parts of the UK. Temperatures in towns and cities down to 4 or 5 degrees in the countryside, cold enough for a touch of grass frost, so gardeners beware. But it does mean that it'll be a much brighter start across many northern and western parts of the UK into Monday. Some showers coming into northern Scotland and the odd heavier one here throughout the afternoon. The rain further south, that will slowly clear out into the near continent, and aside from a few showers across eastern England, actually a lot of fine weather to be had on Monday afternoon. But look at these temperatures, down several degrees compared to what we'll see through Sunday, and with a bit of a brisk northerly breeze for some of us, it will feel on the fresh side. So some further showers to come through Monday evening across parts of eastern Scotland, down to northern England, a few for southeast England as well, but these tending to fade away as we lose the sunshine as the sun sets through the evening. And then we've got a fine at night to take us into Tuesday. Tuesday then sees a few more showers around, mostly dry Wednesday and Thursday, but temperatures a bit disappointing.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I have walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I have walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon and welcome to the second hour of Sunday with Michael Portillo with more conversation, arts and entertainment. Coming up in this hour, following the coronation of King Charles, how much support from the British public will the new monarch receive? Are Republicans doomed to irrelevance? We were rocked by Freddie Mercury, who left an undeniable legacy. Later this year, a collection of his treasures will be auctioned, including handwritten lyrics and glamorous figure-hugging costumes. How is British political policy being shaped by foreign interference? The author of a new book suggests that paid agents are working to alter our public discourse and to dissolve the glue that holds our country together on behalf of countries like Russia, China, and the United Arab Emirates. Should good art by a reprehensible artist remain on public view? With repairs taking place to a statue by controversial artist Eric Gill outside the BBC's London headquarters, I ask whether we are entitled to overlook the artist when admiring good art. And I'll be joined by a leading expert to explore how British food and drink companies find their USP. That's all after the news with Rory Smith.
Thank you very much, Michael. The latest from the GB newsroom. Nurses are calling for a double-digit pay offer to prevent further strike action. The head of the Royal College of Nursing, Pat Cullen, told the Sunday Times that the government risks another 6 months of industrial action if negotiations aren't reopened. Members rejected a 5% offer, which was accepted by 14 other unions. Well, a new ballot for strikes will be held later this month. Liverpool's being seen as the big winner after hosting the Eurovision Song Contest, with the Prime Minister saying the city has done the UK and Ukraine proud. Swedish pop star Loreen made history, becoming the only woman to win the event twice. The country now ties with Ireland for the most song contest victories, both claiming 7 titles. The UK's entry, Mae Muller, finished second last behind Germany. Well, she may have been disappointed, but her fans certainly weren't.
She did a brilliant job and she's represented the UK so well.
She was amazing. She did the UK proud, definitely.
Not #1, but I think we did well. Amazing. Top 5 performance, easily. She's our winner!
Well, as the song contest was underway, Russian missiles were fired at the hometown of the Ukrainian entry. Ternopil was struck as pop group Dvorshi performed, the state emergency service posting a video of a warehouse that was hit. Well, meanwhile, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has secured more military aid from Germany. In Berlin, he thanked Chancellor Olaf Scholz and his government for their solidarity in the fight against Russian aggression. Suggestions of unrest within the Conservative Party are being downplayed after the Prime Minister was blamed for the recent local election results. Rishi Sunak is facing criticism after nearly 1,000 councillors were lost and the decision to scale back post-Brexit plans to scrap EU laws. Former Home Secretary Priti Patel accused the leader of failing to listen to his party, adding the Tories hadn't covered itself in glory since Boris Johnson's leadership. Well, Energy Secretary Grant Shapps says the PM is doing the right things and people just need to be patient.
I think this, and she was referring to this set of elections, which were obviously very difficult for the Conservatives. There weren't a good set of elections for us. But this was the first opportunity people have had to comment on all the shenanigans of last summer and those many leadership changes that went on. I think people were venting their frustration. I actually think that Rishi Sunak, in his 5-point plan to halve inflation and grow the economy and reduce our debt and cut the NHS waiting list and stop the small boats, I think he's doing exactly the right things, and let's judge him against that. Let's judge this government against that when it comes to the next election.
Labour says it has plans to create 80,000 new jobs in the car industry. The party says it will part-finance 8 factories to achieve its goal. It'll also help power nearly 2 million electric vehicles. It says the proposal will see the West Midlands benefit from 28,000 jobs and 11,000 roles will be created in the North West. Well, meanwhile, the Shadow Business Secretary has defended plans to give workers the right to switch off outside of working hours. Labour wants to restrict employers from contacting staff by phone or email, saying workers should be able to disconnect from their devices in their downtime. Similar legislation is already in place in France. Jonathan Reynolds told us it will promote productivity.
I think we do want to see kind of employment laws that will protect family life, give people some time in order to do the other things that are important in life as well as work. I think that's been eroded very significantly in recent years. I think the labour market itself means that more people want flexibility in the workplace, but I'm absolutely confident in the aggregate platform we'll put forward is the one that will give people hope and optimism and turn this country round after 13 years of Conservative government.
Turkey is bracing itself for possible protests or clashes with voting underway in the presidential election. People across the country, including President Erdogan, are heading to polling stations in the first round of the vote. The leader faces the biggest political challenge of his career, seeking re-election after 20 years in power. Well, opinion polls show it will be tight, though, with a clear indication of the results expected this evening. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now, though, back to Michael.
Thank you, Rory Smith. Last week, amongst all the celebrations for King Charles's coronation, a Republican campaign group struggled to gain attention. The Metropolitan Police initially promised to allow a demonstration by the pressure group Republic, but the force arrested 6 protesters, including its CEO, Graham Smith, even though no contravention was alleged. While some support for the monarchy may be lukewarm, seeking its abolition is a minority cause. Recent polls suggest that only about 1/4 of people identify as Republicans. However, that figure has grown by 1/5 in the last year, and only 29% believe that preserving the institution is very important, according to the National Centre for Social Research. Do Republicans need to be taken seriously? And could King Charles restore the public support, not least by slimming down the monarchy? I'm joined now by parliamentary sketch writer and journalist Madeline Grant. Hello, Madeline. Welcome to GB News.
Hi, Michael. Thank you so much for having me.
You wrote recently comparing some of the Republicans and the demonstrators to killjoys, and I think you've made comparisons with Cromwellian Puritans. Tell me your strand of thought.
Well, my strand of thought is that the kind of activist and protesting wing of republicanism is the minority. I completely accept all those points about how there is a growing apathy towards the monarchy. But I think in terms of the people who go out on protests and are engaging with that argument in a very organised way, I think there is a certain killjoyish element, because they often, I notice, seem to object to any kind of ceremonial grandeur, pomp, ceremony, all of that stuff. But in fact, in many countries which have already done away with their monarchies, such as France, they often retain a great amount of the pomp and ceremonial. You know, President Macron has just brought in a new law mandating that all civic buildings have to have a massive portrait of him. I think that this strand of republicanism doesn't really engage with the fact that humans, you know, even a kind of anthropological argument that humans do crave a certain amount of ritual. Their movement seems to be based on just taking stuff away and not replacing it with something that is more hopeful. So I would say in that respect, it's kind of distinct from the general apathy towards the monarchy that we see, which I think is far more likely to be the thing that does ultimately doom the monarchy than any kind of organised movement.
Yeah, although we pride ourselves, we always say, oh, nobody does this as well as the British. I have some doubts about that myself. I mean, for example, you know, I've seen a lot of the United States military. The United States military is extremely sharp on parade, and they have some absolutely fantastic rituals. Or for that matter, I mean, if you look at Russia, which is certainly not a monarchy, you know, you have parades which, you know, are very, very capturing. They are remarkable elements. So I think people who associate ritual with monarchy are absolutely barking up the wrong tree, which is one of the points that you were making.
Yes, exactly. And actually, one of the reasons that I support the monarchy very strongly is that I think that it gives a channel in which to express a patriotic sentiment that is not militaristic so much. It's not as aggressively nationalistic. It's something that is more, I suppose, warm and kind of apolitical. And you pick your poison. If you don't have a monarchy, I think you'll see it expressed in some other way. And I personally think that monarchy is the best way for us to do it. It ties in with our history. And compared to, you mentioned that those polling results earlier about the growing apathy, which is absolutely true. But there's also been a massive general disillusionment, especially amongst young people, towards basically all institutions. You know,
Yes.
Politics, especially the media. Don't even get me started on the media, and the police. So I think that, you know, you have to kind of see it in that context as well, that there is this growing apathy. And compared to many other aspects of public life, the monarchy is not doing too badly.
But apathy is very dangerous, and you are a self-declared monarchist. And I put it to you that, you know, Queen Elizabeth II was a very remarkable monarch, not least because of her longevity and because she never put a foot wrong. So, you know, many people were invested in her. So you might say that they were Elizabethan rather than monarchist. She's now been replaced by someone, you know, with a more varied track record, and he's come to the throne in his mid-70s. This is not the ideal scenario. You know, if you were a PR company, this is not the way you would plan it. Do you think apathy is dangerous?
Yes, I do. I really do. It's a very good point about the Queen vis-a-vis the king. Although I do think in many ways the king has been incredibly foresighted with issues that are now dominating public discourse, environmentalism and the danger of having dysfunctional families and there not being activities for young people and all of this. He was way ahead of the curve, and also in terms of expressing the diversity of modern Britain. So I don't really have. I don't think King Charles is unsuited to that role at all. But it is a very hard act to follow. Someone who genuinely never put a foot wrong at all. But one thing to bear in mind, though, is that if we were to actually have a serious discussion about what the future of the monarchy, what the future of Britain would be post-monarchy, we would then have to start looking at what the alternatives would be. And, earlier I mentioned the collapse in trust, of disillusionment with politics and many national institutions. Well, I think we would start to get discussing what an elected head of state might look like. And actually, under those circumstances, rather than just an abstract discussion about the monarchy, people might decide that they would rather retain the monarch than have, some kind of political figurehead, especially in a world that is so incredibly political. You can barely go to the supermarket without being lectured by household products about ethical mentality or whatever. That having something that truly sits above politics is a very valuable thing. And maybe in a genuine discussion about a republic, people would decide that actually they would rather stick with what they have.
I can answer your question about what the alternative would look like. It would look like Nigel Farage. And although I'm a great friend of Nigel Farage, and of course he's one of our great presenters, I mean that quite seriously. There certainly would have been moments, it may not be now, but there would have been moments when Nigel Farage, I think, would have been elected president of this country. And those who are anti-monarchists, I suspect that the solution they're looking for is not the first Nigel Farage presidency. So maybe that's something that they should be thinking about. However, it would be a great feather in the cap for GB News. Many thanks indeed to Madeline Grant.
Thank you,
For
Michael.
more than 30 years, Freddie Mercury's London home has been untouched, a shrine to the legendary superstar of the rock band Queen, who died in 1991 at the age of 45. The performer filled his Kensington house to the brim with valuable objects, including Victorian and 20th century works, glass sculpture, and Japanese art and fabrics. Freddie's former fiancée, Mary Austin, who inherited this wonderful collection, has decided to send to auction some of his dazzling stage costumes, handwritten lyrics, paintings, and beautiful objects, the proceeds of which will go to the Elton John AIDS Foundation. Prior to the auctions, 3 live in London and 3 online, the collection will tour London, New York, Los Angeles and Hong Kong. Charles Hanson, TV auctioneer and antiques expert, joins me now. Hello and welcome to GB News.
Michael, great to see you.
Is this quite exciting, Charles? Is the auction world really pent up about this?
I think we're gripped by a collection, and I think we think about those very commercial items on stage, on screen, seen, witness in his real life. Behind the scene, Freddie was also a really discerning collector. He absolutely looked in depth at Japanese culture, objects of art, from Fabergé to the frivolous Rococo. He saw everything and he bought the aesthetic. And I think, yes, we're going to see huge sums raised for those Live Aid concert attires he wore, and obviously all those important lyrics written. And in many respects, they're so iconic of the mid-'80s for what he represented. The world, I think, will bid, and I think we'll see some remarkable results.
Yes, I'm very glad you've made the point about his good taste. You know, when I was looking through some of the items in the collection, he obviously did have exquisite taste. Estimates I see that it might raise £6 million or thereabouts. I would have thought it might potentially go a great deal higher. I assume with this sort of sale, it's very difficult to predict. Who knows what someone's willing to give for one of his costumes?
I mean, if you... Absolutely right. I mean, those costumes, you know, you look at the Sgt. Pepper-inspired costume, you look at the lyrics, We Are the Champions, they are so important in the history of music, and in some respects, that time, that civilization, guide price on them, £200,000-300,000. I'd be surprised if they made less than $500,000. So I think you're quite right, and I think that depth of understanding he had for the arts, there are some wonderful objects which you're buying the provenance, you're buying the pedigree of an amazing, iconic figurehead of the last century, but importantly, some really remarkable art as well. I'm fairly hopeful that the sale will take well in excess of £8 to £10 million, and you're buying an iconic object from an iconic person.
Yeah, I saw amongst other things that there is a Picasso in there. I mean, I haven't studied it in depth. Maybe it's a minor Pablo Picasso, but Pablo Picasso is certainly much in demand. Tell me about the technique of how you organise this sort of auction. 3 auctions live in London, 3 auctions online, and the collection tours the world. So this is the way of boosting the excitement, and I suppose there are a lot of dollars looking for art collections in places like New York, Los Angeles and Hong Kong. Tell me a bit about how the auction world approaches this.
I think you've got to take the objects to the worldwide market, and I think the old traditional way of handling objects, being able to see an exhibition in situ, is so important. It's fabulous branding, marketing for Sotheby's. It's a feather in their cap as such. And I think also you're making the best of all worlds. You've got the live animated auction to be seen. You've obviously got the visuals of going live online. And of course, in the Garden Lodge, where the collection sat for 30 years, it slept, it's been sleepy, and now it's awakening. And I think, the opportunity of seeing all that wonderful collection in its original context, and of course what Sotheby's will do is make their sale room become this great stage and theatre for flair, for style, and for passion. And it's quite remarkable, as you say, from Picasso to the greatest Japanese woodblock printers like Hiroshige and Hokusai. His time, Mercury, spent abroad. He loved culture, and I think the objects reflect that. And I would say, you're not buying a fad, you're buying objects with deep meaning as well.
Yeah. I have a feeling that it will help us to understand Freddie Mercury much better. It certainly piqued my interest to see the quality of what he was collecting. So I think we can probably, I don't know whether you agree, Charles, also see a revival of some interest in the man and maybe some, kind of rewriting of our appreciation of him.
Oh, I think so. I think, it's amazing. I'm 45 now. Freddie died at 45. He'll have been 77 this year. And I think, what he achieved in those formative years, the context of his collection, what he put together, it marked the man. And it really captures everything in his life. And objects often tell so much about people. And I think this collection's a real revelation, not just of the style. We can see there the crowning glory of all those fake furs and the crown, but more that intuitive, very, I suppose, initiated man who behind the closed scenes of life away from the camera and on stage had a remarkable eye for life and objects to live with as well. So it'll be a joy to see. I can't wait to see it.
Yes, Freddie Mercury's items are going to be auctioned. The auction, I think, is in September of this year, so probably time for you to save up if you're interested in buying a costume or a comb or maybe a Picasso. Thanks to Charles Hanson for coming on GB News. You're watching Sunday with Michael Portillo on GB News, Britain's news channel. Coming up, are paid agents working on behalf of international powers to undermine democracies? I'll be joined by an author whose new book uncovers subversion. That's after the break.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the people's channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Are international powers able to use agents to undermine socio-political consensus and cohesion? Subversion, a new book by Dr. Andreas Krieg, explores how information, so-called weaponized narratives, are being released by Russia, China and the United Arab Emirates to bring down their opponents. I'm delighted now to be joined by Dr. Krieg. What are weaponized narratives?
Right. I mean, most of the debate usually revolves around disinformation or misinformation, which is a kind of a niche of that whole chunk of weaponized narratives. Narratives are kind of the storylines that we tell each other, how we, make sense of the world, and they can be factual or non-factual. And I think that's very important to kind of broaden it out, to actually talk about weaponized narratives, which are storylines about a particular issue that we might know something about or not. If we don't, and we're being exposed to a weaponized storyline, it's something that we absorb quite easily, that we transport as well, and it shapes how we think about particular problems, particularly problems in the political domain that might be fairly complex.
Who has weaponized it?
Well, everyone is weaponizing it, but I think what this book is all about is about state agents in particular, but also some non-state actors who are malign external powers that are trying to really penetrate our information environments in particularly liberal societies to change the way we think about certain issues and, more importantly, to mobilize us to take action, sometimes taking violent action, changing policy making, and in some instances also, obviously change discourse more widely across the media domain, and most of them are actually authoritarians.
Let's start with an example which might be quite easy to understand and then sort of move on from there. Before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, there were lots of people, you point this out in your book, on the right and the left saying, oh no, the Russians aren't going to invade Ukraine. Why might they have been saying that? What kind of influences might they have picked up?
Now, what's quite interesting is how these information warriors work. They work through networks of a range of different actors, state actors, non-state actors, but mostly private individuals, corporations, funded MPs, academics, journalists. And these networks all kind of work seemingly organically. And what Russia has done, and they've done it, for the last 100 years, the KGB has been very good at it, the Soviets were very good at it, but now they're operating in this hyper-connected information environment where they basically just subvert, hence subversion, active organic movements. The peace movement is currently a very good case study, actually, particularly on the continent, where we see the Russians really infiltrating their thinking and using their anti-war movement to basically plug certain narratives about who's right and who's wrong. Obviously, in their point of view, it's Russia's right, Ukraine is wrong. It's all about the West being evil, America is evil, Britain is evil. And it's a great example of the far left in particular, but also some far right groups who've really bought into the Russian narrative. These are disenfranchised individuals or communities who suddenly feel empowered by storylines about, you know, very simple black and white. The good guys, the Russians, the bad guys are the Americans, the Brits, the West, NATO. And so since 2014, and even before that, we've seen the Russians really penetrating these or targeting these communities in Western societies and mobilizing them.
And take me a stage further. How can they actually demolish our social cohesion? How can they take the glue away from our societies? What kind of strategies are involved there?
I mean, the problem generally with our information environment in this hyper-connected world where, you know, we're fed by social media, we're guided by social media, we live in these kind of echo chambers. The problem with that is obviously, you know, we're already polarizing anyway into different directions, right? Our discourse is very polarized these days. There is a mainstream, and then outside of that mainstream, there's quite a lot of polarization going on. So what these disinformation or these information warriors are doing, the Russians are very good at it, the Emiratis have been extremely good at it in the West, but also in the Arab world, is they're targeting these alienated communities, providing them with, you know, very, very simple sort of narratives to understand the world, and, you know, feeding these kind of grievances that people have. People have grievances, whether they're socioeconomic in nature, and I think that's what Russia is trying to do right now. They're trying to target those people who are now saying, oh, we're hit by inflation, we're hit by all these, you know, all these ramifications of the Ukraine war. Do you actually want this? You know whose fault it is? It's actually the West. That's kind of the narrative that Russia is trying to implant here.
I think you're describing a process here which has gone on since time immemorial. Undermining the other side, subversion, is obviously an old craft. But we lay ourselves open to it in the digital world, is that right? The way we communicate with each other now opens up a new vulnerability, I think. And could you also say, because we're just beginning to run out of time, are we any good at this? Is the United States, is Britain any good at this stuff?
We used to be very good at this. I think the United Kingdom has actually, Britain, throughout the Cold War, had quite a good capability in this, but we lost that capability. We in the West, we thought we won the Cold War, we won that war over narratives, which was the Cold War, right, between liberalism and authoritarianism. We're entering a new Cold War, a new, very, you know, a competition, a great power competition, which is over narratives, essentially. We need to redevelop these kind of networks, and we need to develop information networks, not just at home to defend ourselves against these malicious external warriors, but also develop these networks overseas to kind of promote, you know, what Britain stands for and promote our values in the world, and doing it not necessarily in an antagonistic way, but building consensus. So why I think Russia, the UAE and China, they do it in an almost coercive way, in transactional way, paying people to say what they want to say. We need to go out and build consensus around what our values are, you know, liberal values. And I think liberal values is kind of there's still quite a big audience out there in the world, but we're not doing anything to promote it. We're always on the defensive. And I think this Ukraine war has shown us that we need to build our narratives and transport it to audiences across the world in a consensual manner rather than in a top-down manner.
Yes. Yeah. I got the impression that completely lost the thread of my thought there. How worried are you about all this stuff?
I'm very worried about it. I think we're in the midst of a war. We talk about global competition. That global competition, as I said, is about narratives. We're in the midst of that war.
I know what I was going to say. That the Russians now put this almost at the top of their priorities.
Absolutely.
If you think about their military, this is kind of as important, more important than missiles.
They don't have any tanks anymore, they don't have any missiles anymore, they don't have any troops anymore, but they still have these information and these narratives that they put out there. We need to invest in that as well.
Your book is called Subversion, and the long title is The Strategic Weaponization of Narratives, and it is out now. Thank you to Dr. Andreas King. Coming up, as repairs have begun to restore the work of controversial 20th century sculptor Eric Gill outside Broadcasting House in London, should we cancel the work of a reprehensible artist? That's after the headlines with Rory Smith.
Thank you very much, Michael. The latest from the GB newsroom. Nurses are calling for a double-digit pay offer to prevent further strike action. The head of the Royal College of Nursing, Pat Cullen, told the Sunday Times that the government risks another 6 months of industrial action if negotiations aren't reopened. Members rejected a 5% offer, which was accepted by 14 other unions. A new ballot for strikes will be held later this month. Suggestions of unrest within the Conservative Party are being downplayed after the Prime Minister was blamed for the recent local election results. Rishi Sunak is facing criticism after nearly 1,000 councillors were lost and the decision to scale back post-Brexit plans to scrap EU laws. Well, former Home Secretary Priti Patel accused the leader of failing to listen to his party, adding the Tories hadn't covered itself in glory since Boris Johnson's leadership. The Shadow Business Secretary, Jonathan Reynolds, has defended plans to give workers the right to switch off outside of working hours. Labour wants to restrict employers from contacting staff by phone or by email, saying workers should be able to disconnect from devices in their downtime. Similar legislation is already in place in France. Liverpool's being seen as the big winner after hosting the Eurovision Song Contest, with the Prime Minister saying the city has done the UK and Ukraine proud. Swedish pop star Loreen made history, becoming the only woman to win the event twice. The UK's entry, Mae Muller, finished second last behind Germany. TV, online, DAB+ radio and on TuneIn. This is GB News. Now though, back to Michael.
Thank you very much, Rory Smith. Repair work has begun this week on a Grade 2 listed statue outside BBC's London W1A HQ, following an attack last year which was accompanied by calls for its removal. The artwork depicts characters from Shakespeare's The Tempest and has been on display since 1932. The sculptor, Eric Gill, was said to have sexually abused two of his daughters, with evidence being published in his diaries after his death. A number of 19th and 20th century artists' works have also recently come into question as controversial information has emerged, including about the lives and loves of Pablo Picasso and Paul Gauguin and the anti-Semitism of Richard Wagner. Can we, in good conscience, separate the life of the artist from the art? Joining me now to discuss this is journalist Alexander Larman. Well, Alex, welcome to GB News.
Thank you.
Can we separate them?
I think we have to on an existential level, because I think that if we didn't, we'd end up with a situation that the only people who could make art were entirely morally blameless. And I think that what you have to look at with anyone creating art is, are we offering them a kind of moral relativism? I mean, are we asking for more from somebody because they are an artist? I mean, are we saying you have to behave in a way which we see as acceptable, you have to be morally upstanding? And I think that if you look at many of history's great artists, whether writers, musicians, or indeed sculptors like Gill, a lot of them committed actions which we would see as dubious. I mean, you go back to Lord Byron. I mean, he was a tremendous poet, but he was a terrible, terrible man. And I think that if you look at Gill, I mean, what he did was absolutely abhorrent. And I think we should be quite clear that it's the fact that he abused his daughters, he was incestuous with his sister, and he even abused the family dog. I mean, that's going quite a long way into areas that we would define as depraved. And I think Gill was depraved. He was also a massive hypocrite. I mean, what was very funny is he claimed, while he was doing all this stuff, to be a practicing Roman Catholic. He said he wouldn't work with people if they weren't Catholic. So, as a man, he was clearly failing on those levels.
And you can give us an appreciation of the art. The art that's being restored right now at Broadcasting House, what quality is it?
I think all Gill's art is probably some of the greatest art of the 20th century. I mean, as a sculptor and as somebody who was able to convey these incredible images. I mean, when you see a Gill sculpture, you know immediately what it is and what it's doing. Because what I find so astonishing about the art is that it does mix this paganism, this sexual charge to a great deal of it, which people, especially in his religious works, people will find difficult. They will find it something to be questioned. But I think that's important because Gill was somebody uncompromising. And the fact that the personal life was so abhorrent should not blind us to seeing that ultimately, as a sculptor, what he did. If you go to the BBC and you see that work, it is something which you cannot fail to note. You cannot fail to be impressed by it. And I think it's very telling, actually, that while Gill was behaving this appalling way on a personal level, he was also being commissioned by most of the great institutions of this country. So there's a real sense that Gill was somebody who Britain saw as their kind of national sculpture in his own lifetime. And perhaps we should be asking, well, was there a complicity back then? Because certainly now it's certainly now. I mean, it's far too late to be going into details about, oh, should we have cancelled Eric Gill? Because the fact is, you can't cancel Eric Gill.
No. I've wrestled with this subject about the art and the artist quite a lot, particularly because I'm a great fan of Richard Wagner, so I love his work. He described what he was doing modestly as the total artwork, and I think actually it is the total artwork in a way. It brings together, you know, singing and music and staging and so on. It's a massive undertaking, and what he did is the supreme achievement in that particular field. But he was an anti-Semite, and he wrote about his anti-Semitism very clearly. And then it gets even more difficult because some people think that the anti-Semitism is also in the work. So they think that, you know, a character like Beckmesser is Mendelssohn. You know, they almost sound the same, Beckmesser, Mendelssohn. Yeah. They think that Mima in the Ring cycle, the way that he babbles, may be a sort of very cruel taunting of Jewish people. So these are real problems. And I don't want to make life easy for myself. I don't think I can just say, oh, well, I know he was an anti-Semite, but, you know, lots of people were at that time. And it's not in the work, or it's not very much in the work, so I can overlook it. So I think, you know, people who like these artists' work, I think we should be made to suffer a bit. Do you know what I mean? We should be made to go through the process of justifying to ourselves how we can accept these people's work.
Well, I mean, I've been collecting Gill's pictures and Gill's books for years, and I've got quite a nice collection at home now, but there is a part of me that feels, am I doing something in some obscure way which is leading to human misery? I mean, is there an argument for saying that people like me should not be collecting the artwork of Eric Gill because he did behave in this way which caused all this unhappiness? And that is a valid argument. I mean, we have to wrestle with that, because obviously if we don't wrestle with that, all we are doing is giving blanket permission to anybody, whether it's a Wagner, a Gill or a Gauguin, who has behaved in this fashion. And you think, well, actually, no, we have to ask questions. We have to have some kind of awareness that we are dining with panthers, as it were, that we are doing something which is slightly out of the ordinary. But then on the other hand, as you say with Wagner, and as I would say with Gill, the work is so extraordinary that you do not want to be in a situation where you have to dispose of it.
I wonder whether it's affected by the passage of time. I mean, I imagine most of us are not particularly troubled when we see a Caravaggio by the fact that he killed a man. Some of us may be worried about Paul Gauguin, who had relations with women who are underage. Pablo Picasso, well, he just had lots and lots of women, and I think also they queued up to be his muses. But coming through to the modern day, how do we feel about Michael Jackson, for example? I think his music is still played, is it not?
Well, there's been a lot of arguments about many of these musicians, I mean, including some alive, who have had, you know, relations with underage girls. And the fact is that back in their heyday, this was seen as quite normal behaviour. Now, of course, that would be seen as abuse, and rightly so. But does that mean that these acts, we shouldn't listen to their music anymore? And I think that in the case of Jackson, it's still very much up in the air, the extent to which he was an abuser himself, the extent to which he was abused. I mean, it's the classic man hands on misery to man in his case, isn't it? So.
Then we got Roman Polanski, Woody Allen. I maybe shouldn't put those two directly together, but there are big questions about both of those people. So it isn't, we're not just talking about canvas, we're not just talking about statues, we're talking about all works of art. I was talking about music and stage drama before. The issue is very interesting, isn't it? Do you feel that you and I, who want to sort of hold this line, that we are succeeding in doing so? In other words, are we succeeding in not getting art cancelled when it is very good art, even when it's by very bad people?
I don't think we are in the long term, and I think what's frightening is that the calls for cancellation are growing louder and louder and louder. And in the case of Polanski and Allen, it's more or less worked. So you can see that living people who have obviously, in Polanski's case, have actually been convicted of crimes. In Allen's case, never convicted, but there has been considerable rumour and hearsay and so on. There is a sense now that these people are seen as abhorrent and will be pushed out of the mainstream. But when you go back to Gill, or indeed Stanley Spencer, who's been in the news recently for being racist and for his artwork being taken down in Cambridge, and you think to yourself, well, where's it going to stop? I mean, should we have a policy that you've got to be seen as somebody who would pass the purity test? But then if so, what is the purity test? I mean, who's going to be administering it? And I do think, as I was saying earlier, that artists, to an extent, have to be viewed as these figures outside of society. They can't be viewed as people who are seen as purely subject to the same rules as everybody else. But then perhaps that's the wrong way of looking at it. Perhaps everyone should be seen as people who have to be behaving to a certain moral standard. And if Gil sleeping with a family dog made him a better artist, we should still say, perhaps it'd be better if you didn't sleep with a family dog. Man's best friend.
But you know, talking about a purity test, I mean, that's always supposing that we have full understanding of these things. I mean, you know, people do have private lives. Their private lives don't always emerge. We may be living with art at the moment that we think has come from an artist of good character, and it may absolutely not have done. So, I mean, it just seems to me that we're on a hiding to nothing. But I repeat my point that I think, you know, we do need to suffer a bit on this. We do need to understand that this is a moral problem. We have to admit this in nonetheless asserting that the art is worth viewing and that the art should continue to be on display. I found it a very interesting discussion. Thank you very much for coming in. That's Alexander Larman. You're watching Sunday with Michael Portillo on GB News, Britain's news channel. Coming up, how should British food companies distinguish themselves so as to thrive and beat the competition? I'll be joined by a leading expert who helps businesses to establish their niche. That's after the break.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Is watching.
Welcome back. Next Tuesday, the 16th of May, UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak will host a food summit with industry leaders at Number 10. The meeting is expected to cover issues around inflation and security of supply in British food and agriculture. What are the challenges being faced by this industry in Britain? How can the government help to encourage businesses to grow following the last years of change? I'm joined now by Jane Milton, who is a leading food industry expert with over 30 years of experience in helping businesses in the UK and overseas to find their USP. Welcome to the programme.
Thank you.
What's going to happen at this summit, do you think?
I think there are a lot of topics to cover, and I think the danger is that it's very broad brush and not very detailed, and it really requires a lot of follow-up after it. There are a number of issues that we need to get more focused on, around supply, around keeping costs within predictable parameters, even, so that manufacturers know what they can afford to make and can afford to sell them to other people for. Costs are just changing all the time. There's still a lot of supply chain issues, have been for the last few years. There are big changes in how we shop as consumers, how we work, whether we're in or out of the house. All of that has changed what we need from suppliers.
How much of this has to do with government? Let's start with security of supply.
Yep.
Is there a national security of supply policy?
There isn't, or if there is, it's not performing properly. And things like the Ukraine war may have emphasised some of that, but also when we have issues getting product from Spain because they had climate problems, or now they're saying that there will be issues in the next couple of months on fruit and vegetables coming in from the Netherlands. But here we have issues getting people to work in those industries, having the right people on the ground to be able to work in those. So we don't have good food security in this country, and that is a long-term process. There are a number of growers who tell me that it is cheaper for them to buy in product from overseas at the moment than it is for them to pick and produce in this country, which has to be wrong.
Now, does that matter? I mean, by comparison with fuel, we got pretty worried at the beginning of the Ukraine war. We really wondered whether we were going to have the oil and the gas and everything else that we needed to keep the lights on. But if we have to buy tomatoes from one place rather than another, or if this week there are no tomatoes, does that really matter?
So some of the things that have been affected are bigger and more basic. Obviously, oil, in terms of vegetable oils, all came from that area. And that even led to butter prices going up. Food inflation has been over 15.7%, which is more than it has ever been. And on some individual basic items, eggs, butter, cheese, staple foods that you might have fallen back on to bulk things out, pasta, because of flour, all of those things have gone up by more than 20% individually over the last 2 years. So
you said in passing there, I think, that they were more than they'd ever been, but I don't think that's true, is it? Is it not the case that we now spend much less on food as a proportion of our income than we used to, maybe going back 40 or 50 years?
The UK spends less of their income generally on food than many other European countries do. That has been the case for a number of years. But food inflation in the UK, the amount that food prices have gone up by, has been the most that it has done on record.
Got you, the rate of change.
Which has had, obviously, an effect, because people who were feeling the squeeze because other things had gone up may have cut back on food, but the fact that there's nearly 15% been added generally to the price of a shopping basket, particularly with people on the lowest incomes who already were stretched by that, yes. It's become difficult, which is why we've seen so many people going to food banks. Even people who are working in jobs have had to go to food banks to top up.
A lot of things there that are wrong and that are problems. I wonder if we can end maybe on some more cheerful notes. I mean, for example, in this slot from week to week, we've had people coming in with, yes. I don't know, English sparkling wine or yes. British cheeses. And they've said, how well these products are doing and how they've found their niche. Do you see the opportunity for many more British food industries to find their niche?
There is definitely always an opportunity. When there's a problem, there's always an opportunity. And for instance, in Northern Ireland at the moment, there has been a difficulty with supply through national companies, perhaps, who were bringing products in from England. And that has seen opportunities open up for some small producers in Northern Ireland to supply into those instead of them sourcing from England. So there are always opportunities, definitely. And, you know, during COVID, when British cheese suppliers were badly hit because restaurants shut, they then found other people would look for British products. So definitely there is. And I think, you know, we have seen a better understanding from people that they want to support local, they want to be more sustainable, they don't want to bring things in from further away. Mangoes and bananas we may struggle with, though.
Yeah. No, but this is a big movement in the present day, that people are looking for sort of authentic food that hasn't travelled many miles, and they know about the farm where it was produced and so on. So there must be strong opportunities here, I think.
There are, but I also would say, I mean, a lot of people are looking for food led by price at the moment. There is both, and people haven't flipped, you know, to ignoring one and going straight to the other. But there are some people for whom price will be the biggest deciding factor. So we've got to make sure that we have something for everybody. And I think, you know, manufacturers are very resourceful. Small ones will adapt.
And you didn't bring me any food products today. I'm you know, quite often the desk is piled with food at this stage of the programme.
Oh, but sorry about that. Next time.
What you brought was a pile of expertise. Thank you very much indeed, Jane. Emily, how lovely to see you. Emily Carver, coming on at 1 o'clock.
I am. Last week, Arlene was in your place,
Yes.
Arlene Foster, and she had a chap making tea. So
Yes.
I had a little sip of that.
Well, I'm so sorry, Jane, I have nothing to offer you today. But
That's quite all right.
What can you offer us from 1 o'clock?
What can I offer you? Well, lots of fierce debate, I hope. We're going to be looking at those net migration projections. Good thing, bad thing, have the Conservatives lost control of our borders? It seems so. So we're going to be digging into that. We're also going to be looking at Brexit. Are we delivering on Brexit? All of this talk of this bonfire of regulations, is it going to happen? Will it happen if it doesn't happen now? That's what I'm thinking. If a Labour government comes in, or a coalition, Labour, Liberal Democrats, I think all of that Brexit stuff will be, you know, pushed to one side. So I think it's probably now or never.
The Conservatives have pretty evidently lost control of migration, but do you have any evidence as to whether people think that Labour would do any better? I mean, Labour is actually saying that the Conservative government's policies are too tough and that they would like to weaken them.
Well, this is the thing. I would argue, anecdotally at least, that people abandoned Tony Blair and the New Labour project because they weren't happy with the numbers when it came to immigration. And now we've seen successive Conservative governments do little to change that. So I don't think, oh, Labour would be even worse, is going to wash.
Thank you very much. Emily Carver's here at 1 o'clock. Thanks to all my guests today. I'll be back the week after next. I think Arlene may be here in my place next week. Thank you so much for being with me today on Sunday with Michael Portillo. Bye-bye.
Hello again, I'm Stephen Keats with your latest Met Office forecast, and we've got some patchy rain edging its way across parts of England and Wales this evening and tonight. A few showers elsewhere, but where skies are clearing across northern Britain and parts of Northern Ireland, well, we're turning quite chilly. That's behind this cold front in a colder air mass. This front then slowly shuffling its way further southeast as the evening and night goes on, not making it to the far southeast until later on. So a three-way split then to start our Sunday evening. Clear spells and a few showers across parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland. This front slowly working its way further southeast across England and Wales. The odd heavier burst of rain possible across parts of eastern England for a time into the early part of Monday. Damp ends the night in southeast England. Elsewhere, though, clearing skies, and where we've got those clear skies, it's going to be a chilly old night, actually. Temperatures close to freezing in a few rural spots, but this compensated for by plenty of sunshine for many places across the UK to start the new working week. A few showers, though, breaking out quite quickly across parts of northern Scotland, and as the day goes on, we see the heating of the day, so the showers will break out a bit more widely across parts of eastern Scotland, eastern England. The odd heavier one certainly possible further west. That's where we've got the best of the sunshine, lighter winds. Much cooler, though, compared to what we've seen over the weekend. Temperatures mid to perhaps upper teens at best. Driest in the west with the lightest winds. So showers continuing then into Monday evening for a time before tending to fade as we lose the heating of the day.